Welcome everybody, thank you for coming. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to give this lecture today for the Royal Society. Not only is the 40-spotted pardalote a quintessentially Tasmanian species, but its story is also one of a changing environment and the challenges that face nature conservation today. Not only does the species have to adapt, but we have to adapt as well. Tasmania is an island. It's really important for me to remind us why islands are special and why we should feel proud. Tasmania's bird fauna, and hopefully there's some bird lovers in the audience, is defined by high endemicity and rapid species decline. It's also defined by extinction. Tasmania already has 4 species of birds that are extinct. It's the King Island emu, the Tasmanian emu, Macquarie Island parakeet, and the Macquarie Island rail. Of Australia's most threatened woodland birds, 5 occur in Tasmania. Of those 5, they are all dependent on offshore islands. Orange-bellied parrot, swift parrot, 40-spotted pardalote, King Island scrub tit, King Island thornbill. The King Island scrub tit and thornbill are the 2 most imperilled species in this country. There is merely a handful of birds left, and they are literally on the brink of extinction. Extinction can happen rapidly through major threats or predation, or species can just dwindle and gradually decline and sometimes go extinct before we even realise it. Let's have a look at the distribution maps. And I'd like to read a couple of short paragraphs just to set the scene and also to do some shameless name dropping. Okay. John Gould formally described the 40-spotted pardalote, noting it was peculiar to Van Diemen's Land and abundant in the gullies under Mount Wellington. It was there that he collected a perfectly formed white egg from the body of a female on the 5th of October 1838. In 1855, a pair were collected near New Norfolk and sent to the Great Exhibition of Industries in Paris. From the mid-1870s onwards, specimens were sent to numerous museums collected from King Island, Badger Head, Railton, Denniston at Bothwell, Ouse River, Melton Mowbray, Mount Faulkner, Granton and Austin's Ferry. In the 1880s, Hinsby, he reported 40-spotteds breeding at Scamander and Georges River in the northeast, and in the south at Bruny Island, Southport, along the D'Entrecasteaux Channel and up the north as far as Glenora. Le Souffle recorded it from the Furneaux Islands, and Littler quoted it as plentiful in the Launceston district in 1902. Let's fast forward a little bit. From the 1940s onwards, reports from people like Michael Sharland, Ada Jane Fletcher, were of the species at Scamander, Bicheno, Partridge Island, Mount Faulkner, Mount Rumney, Hobart, Mount Nelson, Tinderbox, Conyngham, Saltwater River, and then by the 1960s on Maria Island. By the 1980s, people like Len Wall, David Millage, and my former boss, Peter Brown, They could no longer find the 40-spotted pardalote on King Island, in the northeast or through the Midlands. And by the time I started on the program in 1990, the species was contained on Flinders Island, Ariah Island, Bruny Island, and a scattering of small colonies on the extreme southeast. Now, despite the 40 spot being one of the most misidentified of all the bird species, including its number of little spots, I don't think we can dispute that it once had a much wider distribution and by now had seriously declined. The 40 spot was listed on state, federal and international legislation as endangered, and the first recovery plan was prepared in 1991. How could a species with a range as wide as that be in such a perilous position? Well, before I throw some theories about that, let's just have a little look at the bird itself. And I'd like to thank Inala on Bruny Island, and particularly Tonya Cochrane, if you're watching, for allowing me to show this footage. Some may say plain, but gee, they make my heart flutter. Okay, let's just have a little look at the ecology and what makes the 40 spot so special. Really, a lot of the life history and ecology of the 40 spot is no different to the other species of pardalote that occur in Tasmania and across Australia. It's a dry forest species, but it's only found in Tasmania. It's pretty productive in its breeding cycle, can have up to 2 clutches a year, 4 to 5 eggs. Like all the other pardalotes, it's a foliage gleaner. It stays pretty much in the canopy of eucalypts, and it does coexist with the other 2 species. But there are some limiting factors or limiting traits that sets this species apart. The 40 spot is linked to one eucalypt species, and that is Eucalyptus viminalis, or white gum, as we call it in Tasmania. White gum produces a substance called manna that is an essential component of the 40 spot's diet. Unlike the other 2 species, the 40 spot is hollow nesting, it forms colonies, and it is largely sedentary. The distribution of the 40 spot overlaps absolutely perfectly with the original distribution of Eucalyptus viminalis in Tasmania. So the map of historical distribution and the natural range of viminalis are exactly a dovetail. So what is it about viminalis that makes 40 spots so crazy? White gum produces a sugary substance called manna. It exudes manna from the damage points on the branches. The secretion first starts as a liquid droplet and then crystallises, very much like icing sugar. Manna is actually sugary carbohydrates. It's something we'd all love in our own diet. It's also a food source that's widely targeted by insects, other birds and mammals. In Tasmania, manna is produced only by Viminalis and Eucalyptus pauciflora, another eucalypt. And manna production can vary not only in the trees that produce it, but also within individual trees within a colony. Manna is essential not only for the adults, but it's been shown that it comprises 80% of the food that adults feed to chicks during the breeding cycle. So it's absolutely critical. It actually comprises about 20 different sugars, and ongoing research at UTAS has shown that it's the ratio of two of the sugars in manna, raffinose and sucrose, that actually determine manna quality. It's likely that all pardalotes have this predisposition for manna. They all have an overhang on their beak. I think I need to point that out. You can see it quite clearly on this slide. This overhang on the pardalotes is really very useful, not only for gleaning invertebrates, but also for picking lerp off leaves and for picking manna. And even though all the pardalotes have this overhang, it's only the 40 spot that's now been recorded as using this overhang to cut tiny grooves in the branchlets and stimulate manna flow. This ability to farm your own food is very rare in the animal kingdom. Most species are opportunistic in the way they feed, but to be able to stimulate your own food actually demonstrates a very long and close evolutionary history with your habitat and your choices. And I really wish Charles Darwin might have known that when he visited Tassie. So we have white gum and we have manna. We have a tiny bird that is intrinsically linked. Viminalis, as you can see in these photos, is very intolerant to drought, and particularly over the eastern half of Tassie, it has undergone massive decline. Dieback collapse, loss of old trees has been a continuing story. With drought and increase in temperature that is now part of the climate change scenario in lots of ways, Viminalis is again undergoing a period of reduction in health. For a bird that is reliant on this tree species and has these specialised traits, when conditions are favourable, everything is fine. But when conditions change, these specialised traits become your Achilles heel. And once you lose your foothold, a whole range of secondary pressures, particularly from more aggressive bird species or other threats, all compound and cause colony decay, colony loss. If you don't have populations nearby to replenish lost colonies, you get regional extinction and you get massive decline. This gives you some idea of the change in numbers since we've been counting 40 spots. The first comprehensive survey estimated about 3,500 individuals. Follow-up work in 2010 estimated a 60% decline. We don't have recent estimates, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But even though we don't have a firm handle on the total population, we're very confident that not only are there less now, but colonies continue to be lost. For those of you who are familiar with locations in the south, Peter Murrell Reserve, which is in Kingston, the top end of Howden, we have pretty much lost 40 spots from that area in a very short space of time. On Dens Hill Reserve on Bruny Island, once touted as the largest colony on private land, has gone from over 250 birds to probably less than 20 birds. So the story of decline is continuing. However, we have built a foundation, and that's why this story about 40-spotted pardalote conservation is not one of dread and loss, but is one of hope. Because for the last 30 years, we have built a very strong foundation. And the first plank of conservation is to protect habitat in the wild. And that's exactly what we've done. We've done it consistently, systematically, and also by stealth over 30 years. These maps on Bruny Island are to give you an example of how we have identified colonies, and through programs such as private land covenants, incentives, land swaps and land purchase, we have been able to encourage private landholders to secure and protect habitat on their land. Most of the colonies, or the potential habitat for the species, say for example on Bruny Island, is adjacent to existing reserves. Nowhere is this story more profoundly represented than on Tinderbox Hills. Tinderbox Hills, south of Hobart, south of Peter Murrell Reserve, is a headland, a peninsula, very close to the tip of Bruny Island. And it was only a few years ago, in fact it was only about 2018, that a development application was earmarked for a parcel of land on the lower edge of the spine that, in my words, would have been the beginning of the end for the integrity of the habitat in this area. The Tasmanian Land Conservancy, a private NGO, which I'm very proudly part of, launched a fundraising campaign to purchase that block of land. The land is 67 hectares, it's shown on the slide here in red, and through public donations they were able to secure that property. And if you can picture a beautiful bush block very close to Hobart with magnificent views down on the Derwent River, you can only imagine what that block of land was sold for. As is the philosophy of the Tasmanian Land Conservancy and land protection, that 67 hectares adjoined in blue an existing covenanted parcel of land, and adjoined in green a public reserve known as Tinderbox Hills Reserve, managed by Parks and Wildlife. So 67 hectares has translated into 200 hectares of reserve. And that is a fantastic philosophy and demonstrates how private and community can play a major role in nature conservation. colonies on Tinderbox you can see shown in red. It also gives you an idea of how 40 spots are distributed in the landscape. If we were to map white gum on Tinderbox, you probably would get exactly the same map. On the opposite side, the blue dots are the monitoring sites that we've now established, about 25 along Tinderbox Spine, going right through Peterborough Reserve and right up to the intersection with Blackmans Bay. The monitoring that we are now rolling out is based on some more current techniques. That involves repeat site visits, so we go back and back and back. We can then estimate detection probability, occupancy, and this information will help us eventually get a new population estimate. We were lucky really with the 40 spot that a lot of the important colonies occurred on existing private reserve, public reserves, which included Mariah Island, fantastic island, a little bit overlooked, but very special. We've established monitoring on Mariah Island. You can see the red flags. Again, there's about 75 monitoring sites there. It takes 3 to 4 days to get around all of those sites when the weather's suitable. And on the opposite side, that is a map of what was the first ecological burn ever undertaken for 40 spotted pardalotes in Tasmania. And this was undertaken last year on Mariah Island. And I really thank the Parks and Wildlife Rangers and the fire staff for organising and undertaking that burn at the isthmus. For those of you who remember the catastrophic fires on Kangaroo Island in South Australia a couple of years ago, that was such a wake-up call for us to see and appreciate how quickly a wildfire can decimate an island's ecology and put species that are confined there at absolute risk. So Mariah Island is not only important as a repository for 40 spots, it could well be the site that we collect birds in the future for any translocation. Let's talk a little bit about Flinders Island. A little population of 40 spots confined there for over 10,000 years. We need to know about those birds, how they're surviving. As I said, in 1990s, when I first started going to Flinders, we had colonies up in the Darling Range, Walker's Hill, Brahms Sugarloaf. Today, we have a very, very small colony in the south, in the Strzelecki Range. The last time I visited there, we couldn't find any birds at all. But in 2017, we joined forces with the Difficult Bird Research Group from ANU and installed 60 nesting boxes in that gully. It was a major trip and it was totally sponsored with philanthropic donations. It was really the first concrete recovery actions that we've been able to do for those birds on Flinders Island, and I can only cross my fingers and hope that it started to have some benefit. Research and management. There's been a resurgence in the last decade of research on this species. It's really started to capture the attention of academic institutions. And this slide shows 3 PhD, or 2 that have been completed and 1 that's underway at the moment. In the bottom corner, there's Erin Bock from UTAS holding some foliage, and UTAS in the life sciences area have really started to increase their research focus on 40 spots, particularly on habitat and manna production. At ANU, we have the Difficult Bird Research Group, and the large photo is of Amanda Edworthy, a Canadian lady that came out and did her PhD in 2012. And Amanda's work really opened up some new areas of interest for 40 spotted pardalote conservation. And since her work, there's been a real focus and energy on some of the new threats that she identified. The middle photo is of Fernanda Alves, who only recently finished her PhD and did a fantastic job looking at genetics, productivity, and also following on the work from Amanda at looking at a parasitic fly that is new to us. And this fly is able to lay its eggs subcutaneously in the chicks. And of course, that not only causes mortality, but it totally compromises breeding productivity. So I'd like to just show a little bit of footage that we've been allowed to screen, compliments of the ANU, on the really exciting work that Fernanda has been undertaking.
My name is Fernanda Alves. I'm doing my PhD on the 40 spotted pardalotes, and we are trying to understand a little bit of their threats and trying to come up with ways that we can mitigate some of those threats. So there's a 40 spot up there. Well, it flew away now. Anyway, so they are tiny little birds that live on the canopy of white gums. A previous PhD student studying the 40 spotted pardalote, she ended up discovering a parasitic fly. So this fly goes into the nest and lay the eggs inside. So once the larvae hatch, they feed on the pardalote, causing severe mortality. We came up with this idea to build these feathers dispensers. So it's basically putting feathers for them to use as nesting material, and you spray those feathers with insecticide. So pardalotes could do the hard work of carrying the nesting material into their nests rather than us climbing a tree to do that. The results of this experiment was really good. Pardalotes are able to carry that insecticide really inside the nest, and pardalotes can learn pretty quickly to use those feather dispensers. So we hope that now wildlife managers can use that as a management practice in areas where we know the fly is an issue.
What a novel and exciting research idea. Come up with feather dispensers instead of manually putting them in nest boxes, get the birds to do it themselves. I've mentioned the collaboration between public and private, and no more is this demonstrated better than through a program called Land for Wildlife. Hopefully some of you are aware of Land for Wildlife and have seen the signs on people's gates. Land for Wildlife, particularly on the Tinderbox area and Bruny Island, has really ramped up in recent times. Landholders are now really keen to become involved with the 40 spotted pardalote program. Those that are near existing colonies or have good white gum want to put up boxes. We've been running community workshops to demonstrate how the boxes can be made and how they can be erected, and also to monitor the boxes because we need the data, we need to know what's working. The box that I'm showing there, if Andrew Marshall is watching, allowed us to use this photo, was only put up quite recently by a family on Tinderbox Hills, and I'm really hopeful that in time that box may support a pair of birds. Since the program began, we've erected, for research and also community involvement, over 500 boxes. So we've got the foundations of a really great data set and program to build on. Tree planting has been ongoing since the 1990s. We first gave out 2,000 trees that were grown by the Tasmanian Botanic Gardens. Landholders on Bruny Island have been growing seedlings, Understory Network, and more recently Kingborough Council, and give the seedlings away. We've done mass plantings, and the photo that you can see of white gum were planted at Murrayfield on Bruny Island near the neck, and that's run by the Indigenous Land Corporation.
And only recently I was in that little patch doing some monitoring and it was filled with 40 spots, and it was like a real high five moment. It demonstrates that replanting, not just to create new habitat, but linkages and corridors for movement is absolutely essential and a foundational plank for this story. Hopefully some of you would have gone to the Bruny Island Bird Festival. I can certainly see a lady in the front row that was there. It's a great community promotion for the birds on Bruny Island, and the 40 spot is one of a major attraction. It was held in March this year. It's held every couple of years. It's going from strength to strength, and it demonstrates that we have a species that attracts a lot of community interest. It also attracts bird watchers from all over the world. A lot of the work on Bruny Island is coordinated by the Bruny Island Environmental Network, BN, again a volunteer group. And I guess if you can put these pieces together, you realise that there are people and community groups that are working so tirelessly to implement conservation actions for this species. They go under the radar, unnoticed and unfunded. So, to finish up, what have we learned in the 30 years that we've been putting in recovery actions for the 40-spotted pardalote? Protecting their habitat, tick, it works. Planting VIM, putting out nest boxes, tick, it works. We know more about their genetics, we know about the importance of manna, we know about some threats and how to treat them. Tick, that's a great start. Community support, fantastic. I can't think of many other recovery programs that have the level of community support and diversity of organisations involved in this species protection. Tick. And there's the but. But we still have decline and loss of colonies. What is that telling us? It's telling us we've got to do more. We've got the foundation, now we need to ramp it up. We need a little bit more activity in this space. We need to be more proactive, a bit bolder, a bit more hands-on. Maybe we need to start shifting birds around, putting them back into spots where we know they can survive. We need some complicated modelling and statistics to tell us, well, actually, how many birds do you need to make sure that population's going to survive? We need more fire management, both for protection and to stimulate habitat. We desperately need long-term monitoring to tell us if we've got more birds or we're still losing them. And we need more research to tell us what those threats and those limiting factors are all about. So while we've achieved so much, threatened species recovery is a long-term process. It doesn't happen quickly, and we're all in it for the long haul. And that's why I'm very pleased to thank you for coming, and also all of the partners that have been involved in this program, particularly the 40-spotted pardalote recovery team. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sally. So we do have time for some questions, and what I suggest you do is, if you've got a question, to call it out as loudly as you can, and Sally will repeat it before answering it. How about that? So any questions from the live audience to begin with? There you go. Yep, please go ahead.
How old does a viminalis have to be before it starts producing manna? I can't give you an exact age on that because UTAS is still doing their trials, but age of tree is something that obviously has a strong connection with manna production. Also, I don't know if I mentioned that manna is a type of sap, and because sap is related to the water integrity of the tree, there's a direct link there, including if it's impacted by climate change. The stand of Viminalis that I showed in one of the last slides was planted in 1992, and it definitely has lots of 40 spots in it now, but it's probably had 40 spots foraging on invertebrates and lerp, irrespective of manna. Hello, Ross. The spotted and the striated pardalote in Tasmania, I don't use the word common anymore. It's almost derogatory. Both are very widespread. There's no evidence of either species declining. They're both generalist pardalote species, and they do very well in bush, natural bush and modified areas. So there is no evidence of a decline as far as I'm aware. Next to Ross. That's a good question. What do we mean by sedentary? It's actually a very good question because it does require a little bit more explanation. Sedentary almost means that you stay put, and certainly the adults stay put. The colonies, the breeding colonies, if you can think of the map that I showed of Tinderbox Hills, we could have mapped those colonies in the 1990s and they are still there today because the habitat exists. However, the juveniles will roam and off they go. They'll often team up with other pardalotes and also other honey eaters, and you'll pick up 40 spots in areas that are outside of the colonies. But come breeding time, it is the breeding colonies with the adults that are paired up, that have access to hollows, that is the basis of this species' life history. So they do move. They don't move huge distances. However, having said that, they will go across from the tip of Bruny Island across to Tinderbox and up that spine. So they will cross water, and it may be that the juveniles are much more capable of dispersal than we're aware. Having more information on movement is something maybe with trackers and other technologies we'll be able to see exactly where they go when they fledge from the nest. How the exact number of 40 was decided on. When I first held a 40 spotted pardalote in the hand, when we were netting, mist netting down on Partridge Island, we counted and they had 40 spots, 20 on each side. And it was like, high five to John Gould. But actually not every bird has 40 spots. Some have lost a bit of a spot or some of the feathers have dropped out. And in fact, it is a very aggravating name, and I blame John Gould and I blame everybody for the fact that people see a spot and they think they've got a 40 spot. They see a spot on the head, it must be one of those rare pardalotes. They're not rare, they're in my garden. That girl, she doesn't know anything. It just creates endless confusion. So if it was called, I don't know, the little pardalote of lutruwita, gosh, that's got a ring to it, hasn't it? The manna bird, something other than 40 spotted. I think we would have certainly avoided a lot of the confusion, which, if, I am serious, the amount of records that we have from people that come to Tassie with their binoculars and are not familiar, they find a bird, they think it's a 40 spot, they'll lodge a record, they'll put it on eBird and off it goes. And, it has created a huge amount of confusion. Oh, I'm so on that team if we change the name. I'm under pressure at the moment to put forward the native hen as Tasmania's bird emblem, and I have declined going into that space. all it would take is a little bit of a concerted effort. It's funny how people do get very wedded to the literature and traditional use of names, but I think it would be a terrific idea to change the name of this species. Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can put your mind at rest there. You mentioned about the insecticide used on the feathers. And if Fernanda was here, she would roll her eyes because that question has been put to her many, many times, and she's very reassuring to say that they looked into the use of insecticide and natural substances that were deterrents, and what they use on the feathers is not harmful. Of course, they're looking at other ways of getting the boxes to be fly-proof, but we are between a bit of a rock and a hard place with that, because to detract and repel flies does take a deterrent. But I'm very confident that ANU looked closely into what they could use that wouldn't be harmful to the birds. The question was, are manna gums different on the mainland to here, and should we be planting other strains or not provenant species? The gist of that question is what we should be doing is planting white gum so that it is less affected by drying, and if that takes new strains or targeted planting in areas where they only have access to water, that's what we now need to look at. I do not know if Viminalis is different between Tasmania and the mainland. The UTAS group would certainly be able to answer that, but I'm unaware of that. I can at this point just mention and give Tonya Cochrane a shout out, who has fantastic property called Inala on South Bruny Island, and her property is, you know, an exemplar for what happens when white gum have access to a creek line and are looked after and are filled with nest boxes, and there's a viewing platform right in the middle of the colony. It is like a magic 40-spot wonderland to go down to Inala. So we do know that the health of white gum is paramount for maintaining large numbers of 40 spots.
We've got some questions online. Could you cover off on which organisations we can donate to support this great effort?
Just get my personal bank account out now. The question was about which organisations to donate to. Certainly private organisations. First and foremost, I would like to encourage any donations to the Tasmanian Land Conservancy. Do I have a conflict of interest? Yep, straight up. Not only do the Tasmanian Land Conservancy protect pardalote habitat, they also have the Bird Research Foundation, which at this very point in time is supporting 2 new students to do research work. So there's the Tasmanian Land Conservancy. There is also the Bruny Island Environmental Network, fantastic organisation on Bruny Island. They would love any donations that could be made. Bruny is the focus of community support, so a big shout out to BN and Inala, Tonya Cochrane. She is a maverick in this space and has a property and also a foundation fund. So there's 2 on Bruny Island and there's 1 off Bruny Island. So that's a good start, and my bank details are...
Why are nesting boxes needed, and what is the minimum size of Viminalis woodland, mature age with hollows needed to sustain 40-spotted pardalote colonies?
Yep. I've forgotten the first part of that question, but the second part, we've got a template for nesting boxes and it is available on the BN website. I think it's also on the Tasmanian Land Conservancy website. These boxes are absolutely schmick They're A-grade boxes, and that's exactly what we want for our little 40 spots. We don't want any rubbish out there in the environment. And the smallest colony that I've ever mapped was 1 hectare. And I always had a very non-scientific formula, but I still keep it, that you needed 20 viminalis to support a pair, provided those viminalis included 2 big mature trees with spreading canopies. So a 1 hectare colony can support a pair of birds, but obviously those pair have got to link up with other colonies nearby, so it takes a little bit of configuration to make sure that birds can move, they can link, and they can come back and expand. And really you want breeding colonies to expand, because the integrity of a colony becomes more robust the bigger it is. If you are small, you've got a lot of edge to protect and defend, and it is much better to have multiple pairs all in one area of large intact habitat, as I mentioned about Tinderbox, Dens Hill, other areas that have got multiple pairs, because you have great energy from that colony to defend off other species. Once there's a dwindling edge effect, it becomes very difficult to maintain that. And that 1 hectare colony that I mentioned on Bruny Island has actually subsequently been cleared. So,
Do you have enough folk to observe, watch, record and monitor, and is it a difficult process to learn? If you need more people, could it become an activity for something like People Science Project?
that's a very good question. Do we need more people? Is it a difficult activity? Can you help? I've worked a long time on birds, and I do a lot of field work. A lot of looking up in the sun, a lot of binocular work, a lot of work by ear. The 40 spot is not a species for everybody to work on. It is difficult. It is often very quiet. It doesn't always call. All the pardalotes are high in the canopy if there's any wind or movement. What I'm getting at is it is actually a very specialist activity. But what we need are 2 things. We need experienced birdos, and they've got to cut their teeth on learning about 40 spots, because irregular recordings and difficult records create more work. But there are very good people out there that we harness. There's very good bird observers and researchers that have come on side, so we do have a growing network, but it's not an activity for landholders generally. But what landholders can do is protect, put in their nest boxes and monitor their boxes. And if you've got access to a pair using a nest box or a nest hollow on your property, you're in a privileged position to learn how to identify by sight and by call and by nuance this species. So on one hand, I'm saying yes, become involved, but on the other hand, it does take time and a lot of experience. Oh, one more question over there. Yes. We probably have more work to do in that area to investigate the nutritional value of manna. As I said, we know that it's a major component of the diet fed to chicks, and in areas where we've had a lot of rain and there is no manna production, chicks have died. But pardalotes also eat a lot of invertebrate. They also eat lerp, and lerp is the sugary coating of a psyllid, and that is also high in sugars and carbohydrates. When you're a high energy bird, and I'm thinking of swift parrot, that in the breeding season absolutely targets blue gum because it has the most nectar. You're in the major lolly shop when you've hit blue gum flowering. That sugar for fast, rapid growth and energy is probably what is the nutritional need at that period in the life cycle. It may be that manna is not eaten after the breeding period in anywhere near the same quantity, but that nutritional value is an area certainly for more research. Oh, hello, James. Oh, my best 40 spot experience. Well, given that you asked that question, James Hatton, who is the CEO of the Tasmanian Land Conservancy, thank you for coming. I've had many 40 spotted experiences. In fact, anyone who loves birds can have the most magical experiences from your kitchen window. I've had a very privileged life in conservation, and there's a lot more of it to come. But to answer that question, I don't know if it was my best, it was my most aggravating, and in fact it was with you. And James was doing some survey work down at Southport near Ida Bay. He was surveying a property for a covenant. He came back to the office and said to me, "Oh, I've heard something it's a bit different." He recorded it on his phone, we listened, I screwed my nose up. I thought, okay. We organised to go down and have a look. We traipsed all over that property. We heard some little obtuse calls coming from here, coming from there. We were just getting back in the car to head back after deciding, nothing here to see. And a phone call from two people who I would like them to remain anonymous said, "Hey, Sal, guess where we are? We're down at Southport Lagoon. We've just discovered a colony of 40 spotted pardalotes." It's like pipped at the post. Oh, so that's probably my most aggravating experience, but it was a good one. Yes, it is. The question was, you have striatids that come back to the same boxes and bring their juveniles. Yes. And that again demonstrates the importance of protecting nest sites and building up those territories where you've got a resource. And that is exactly what 40 spotted pardalote do. The juveniles go off, but then come back. The adults may not necessarily, as far as I can tell, but this does need to be confirmed, go with the juveniles or the subadults all the time, but that dispersal, but coming back to a site, it also demonstrates the importance of protecting a nesting site. And if Paul Davis was here, who has built so many pardalote boxes and has striatids coming out of his jackets hanging on hooks from his garage, it shows you that pardalotes in particular are very colonial in their nature, and when conditions are good and sites are good, they're very advantaged. Of course, if that's lost, it's a weak link in that trait. Oh, one last one. Hello, Vika. The colonies that have conservation covenants are perpetual covenants. They go on title, and all of the information that we currently have says that they are a very strong mechanism. Very few conservation covenants, to my knowledge, in the history of that entire program of applying covenants, has had covenants taken off title. However, areas are still under threat, and we currently, as in the 40 spotted pardalote recovery team, have been putting in submissions about the growth around Howden, the Huntingfield estate. People pressure is enormous. In the Kingston area, it is enormous, and I don't want to use the term sacrificial, but Peterborough Reserve has had so much pressure from industrialisation, more people in a smaller area, all wanting access to nature and recreation, all taking their dogs, all on their bikes, all with their horses. And I guess it demonstrates the importance, say, for example, of Tinderbox Hills, where we have places where people don't move in. So, you know, it is a fraught space. It's like conservation all over Australia. But one thing I can say as I finish up is I've never heard the word climate change mentioned so often as in this last election, never. And I have never felt more encouraged with a change of government and the fact that we now have an Environment Minister that is experienced and senior. Whether that makes a difference, I don't know, but it fills me with hope that maybe we have a new era unfolding.
Now,